Victoria Mattingly, your host of the SIOP Conversation Series, where we chat with leading industrial organizational psychologists. This is episode number 32, and we'll be talking about science for attracting and retaining talent in the workplace. Today, we'll be focusing on the top 10 trending topics in the field of IO psychology, talent attraction and retention in a candidate-driven market. Welcome to the SIOP Conversation Series, Benjamin Schneider.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Benjamin is a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Maryland and a research affiliate at the Center for Effective Organizations, Marshall School of Business, USC. Ben is widely published, including 13 books and more than 125 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters. He's won numerous awards for his research contributions from major professional societies in IO, management, and marketing. He writes about and consults with organizational clients on employee engagement, service quality, organizational climate and culture, staffing, and the role of personality in organizational life. A true holistic IO psychologist, as I say so myself. And more details about Ben and his work can be found at www.drbenschneider.com. Ben, we're so thrilled that you could join us here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great. Yeah. Thanks for the introduction, and please do call me Ben, not Benjamin.
Absolutely. You got it, Ben. To start our conversation, we'd love to hear more about just your journey as an IO psychologist. You definitely have the most prolific career of all the interviewees that I've gotten to have these conversations with over the last year. And so I know there's a lot of early career and students out there, but also mid-career IOs that would love to hear about your journey as an IO psychologist. So how did you get involved in the field, and what spurred your interest in organizational climate and culture, work engagement, talent hiring and retention, and all the work that you do? So just share a little about your story with us. We'd love
You
to
want all of that in 3 minutes, right?
You can take as many minutes as you'd like.
So, yeah, I mean, it all started with a class I took as an undergraduate student in industrial psychology. And I can remember it to this day. I was reading the textbook, and I saw something called the Purdue Pegboard Test. Purdue Pegboard Test. And that was one of the very earliest formal tests designed by IO psychologists for hiring people who could do fine-grained work with their fingers. And it was a simulation of a job, not the job itself. And I said to myself, now that's really cool, that you can take a job and find facets of it that you can simulate through human behavior and so forth. And so that got me interested. And then I went back to summer school, took a course. I went and got my MBA in industrial psychology. It's one of the first programs that where you combine the industrial psychology with the business, and that was at the City University of New York. I then went into the Army for a couple of years, where I was a testing officer. And it was during my master's degree program that I really got interested in research. So I wasn't sure. Actually, even in my PhD program, I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to do academics or practice. And so I ended up doing both. I got my PhD and I've taught at many places. I don't seem to be able to hold one job for very long. And I've also been really lucky. I've taught overseas, had a Fulbright in Israel. My wife and I were forced to spend 6 months in Aix-en-Provence in the south of France. So yeah, it's just been a hoot. It's been involving and interesting, and the companies I've gotten to work with and projects I've been able to work on are quite varied, going ranging from personnel selection to organizational culture. And I can't say enough to potential IO types about what a wonderful field it is. And what makes it particularly wonderful are the people who get into it. the people who get into IO psychology seem to be very broad minded, interested in lots of features. And, because we're psychologists, but in the workplace, we get to deal with all of the issues of human behavior. And that makes it just, unendingly interesting. And it's as I said before, it's just been a hoot.
I love how you started in the MBA space because I feel like I have whenever early career or students, reach out and they say, what should I do? What should I know? And I'm like, take some MBA classes, get over there in the business school. All IOs should have a business school affiliated with their university to get that knowledge, get that business acumen, because it helps whenever you get into the organizations and start, talking to clients and be able to speak their terms and speak their language. How did your MBA influence the type of research topics that you ended up getting into and your overall career? Because that's unique, I feel, for IO.
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think the MBA influenced the research topics, but
Mm,
it did influence my approach to the research. So early on, I got interested in organizational climate, and the first project I did was actually on customers in
hmm,
a bank. So I actually published a paper called "Organizational Climate: The Customer View," and
hmm,
so we did a project. Actually, I was a young, starving assistant professor, and myself and another guy, Matt Sobel, we went and we wrote some proposals to some banks to do a project on um, customers and how they felt about standing in line. At one
hmm.
time, people actually stood in line at banks, and so it was something they didn't particularly enjoy. And we went and we interviewed customers, and we kept track of how long they were in the bank and asked them about it. And one of the things we heard was, it wouldn't be so bad waiting in line here if the people who served us weren't so grumpy and treated us
Mm,
like we were important people. And after I heard that about 100 times, I said to myself, I think maybe there's something there that we should talk to the people who serve them.
yeah.
And that started the whole stream of research. And my classes in marketing were what helped orient me towards this combination of
Mm.
the people who serve and the people who get served. And that's that early research I did linking service climate to customer satisfaction.
I love that. It was my experience working in restaurants that really informed my journey as an IO psychologist, and thinking about how I was trained on the menu and the wine list and steps of service, but never had to deal with the emotional labor and the stressful environments. And like, there's such an opportunity here to give those skills and share those
Right,
skills
right,
to
right.
customer service. So that really resonates with me. Um,
Yeah.
Going back to the topic of talent hiring and retention, what ignited your interest in that, and what has been some research that you've done in the past really specific to the hiring and retention piece? Just thinking about our topic for today.
Well, as a graduate student, the focus in early IO psychology was unbelievably heavy on measurement and personnel selection.
Mm,
And we've done great work in that area as IO psychologists, and business really values what we do, and so forth and so forth. And like Paul Sackett and his colleagues have this recent article in JAP looking at validity generalization and the various corrections in meta analyses.
mm,
And even with his more stringent corrections in the recent article, it shows that personnel selection is a reliably valid predictor of
mm,
of individual performance in the workplace. And everything was individual. And I read a book by Ed Shine one of his really early books, like 1965.
Mhm.
And it was one of the first two books with the title Organizational Psychology.
Mm.
And I kept always thinking that there's more to work and working than your personal individual characteristics, that there's the environment in which it happens and stuff like that. And so that's what got me interested in mixing, literally
Mm.
mixing the individual with the organization. And I worked on that for maybe 6 or 8 years and finally came up with this notion that it's the individuals, it's the kinds of individuals in organizations that make them the way they are. So I it was actually my presidential address to, it wasn't even SIOP yet, to the Division of Industrial Psychology, Division 14,
Mhm.
which got published in 1987 with the title The People Make the Place. So the
Mm.
best thing I've ever done in my entire career is that title,
Mm.
because people really grabbed it. And what I argued in the paper is that organizations are who they are because of the kinds of people they attract, select, and keep.
Mm.
So, in a real sense, I argued that organizational culture is at least partially determined by the kinds of people in the organization, and it was an organizational level phenomenon. And
Mm.
there's probably 25, 30 studies now that validate this idea that organizations can be differentiated from each other based on the kinds of personalities the people have who are attracted, selected by, and kept in those organizations. So these
Mm.
are not the people features, the people you hire are caused by, the type of people you hire are caused by literally the kind of organization you are and they think you are.
Mm.
And what the research literature shows, and there's this one fabulous meta analysis by In Su O and his colleagues. The title of the paper is Birds of a Feather Flock Together, um, demonstrates clearly that there are these three cycles in organizations: attraction, selection, and attrition. And the thing that most, the act in organizations that most tightly ties people to the kind of organization it is and the other people there is in the selection mode.
Mm.
So the people who in practice and in research do personnel selection look at everything at the individual level of analysis. And what this research stream is able to show is if you jump the level of analysis, you can show between organization differences at the same
Mm.
time you have within organization differences, right? So both phenomenon exist simultaneously. So I don't think you can't divorce personnel selection from who you are as an organization, because you will attract particular kinds of people and select particular kinds of people and keep particular kinds of people.
Yeah.
Not that everyone's the same,
Yeah.
just that they are more homogeneous in who they are and the kind of people they are than the people are in another organization.
I love that. And I want to make sure I get this right. The title of that of your address was The People Make the Organization. Did I get
People
that
make
right?
the place. The people make the place.
The people make the place. I love that.
Yes.
I'm going to even put that on the screen. So, that in mind, the people make the place leads me right into the next question. So, in today's job market, applicants seem to be assessing organizations as much as organizations are assessing applicants. What are some of the key drivers for attracting high level talent to the organization? and what are applicants avoiding, right? So before we even get to the selection stage, right now in a candidate
Right.
driven market, how
Right.
are flipping the script, how are people assessing the place to decide if they're applying in the first place?
Well, the first thing I had to do is correct what you said. You said now people seem to be looking for the kind of place that's going to be attractive to them. But it's not now, it's been forever. So people have always looked around and said, which place do I think I'm going to fit best in? We have this idea that people are only attracted to companies where there's 100,000 employees or something like that. But 75% of all people who work in organizations with fewer than 500 people.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
so people know the companies in the town where they live. They know what these organizations are like. And now with mass media, we know a lot about different organizations. For example, I was reading this morning about Home Depot. Home Depot is now generating about 30%, I think, about 30% of their electrical requirements through solar and wind processes. So now, people who read that and are interested in climate and climate change and stuff like that, they say, well, now, if I was going to go to work for a company that was in the home construction supply business, that would be one I'd be attracted to because of the way they are operating. So, all of the information people have and have access to and seek
Hmm.
now contribute to how attractive they will find an organization to which they might apply. And a central issue now is the reputation the organization has as one that cares about the people in the organization as well as the success both of the organization and the people in them. And
Hmm.
so the more those exist, the more attractive the organization will be to potential candidates.
I love that. And in my field in diversity, equity, inclusion, that is definitely a key aspect that people are searching for, especially younger generations. And so, absolutely, that information that companies put out there really influence whether people are applying in the first place. What
Yeah.
what aspects of organizations do you think applicants are avoiding, or what types of organizations?
Um, I think people are more attracted to organizations than they are avoiding other organizations. So
Interesting.
I think that the conscious thing is to try and find a good fit rather than to avoid a bad fit. And so people do make mistakes because they'll see a characteristic of a company that they think they really want. Maybe they pay a higher wage, for example,
Mhm.
and that's something that they're after is a higher wage. But then they discover when they get on the job, they're being paid that higher wage, but the way they're treated and the future career opportunities they have there are poor. So uh, people, I think, are always balancing off different facets of who they are at a particular point in time. I've always been impressed by work done by this vocational theorist, the career theorist, John Holland. And he showed that over time, people keep changing jobs until they best fit their vocational and career characteristics.
Hmm.
But we don't get it done all at once, right? We maneuver around until we find the kind of place that's going to work best for us. Now, what works best for people is not only the current situation, but their predictions about what the future holds for them, right?
Mm,
So I've always been um, impressed by the early job satisfaction measure by Smith, Kendall, and Hewlin, where the promotion scale in that job satisfaction measure is the opportunity for promotion. It's not
mm,
whether or not I got one, it's whether or
mm.
not I have an opportunity to get one. And so I always think about people being attracted to, that's the word, people being attracted to opportunity.
Oh, I love that. And I just wanted to just shout out to the viewers watching live right now. If you have questions for Ben, feel free to put those in the chat, whether you're tuning in on LinkedIn or YouTube, Twitter. So feel free to put some comments in the chat and Ben can answer those live for you today and the time that we have with him. And so moving into culture and climate and that role in shaping employee experience. Given your interest in research in the area, Ben, could you talk a little bit about how culture and climate influence talent attraction and retention?
They are they are in reciprocal relationship.
Hmm.
So I think I wrote a little note in an IOS in the IO Psychology Journal as commentary on a paper that was published there, and I commented that IO Psychology and the social sciences in particular operate in a left to right world.
Hmm.
So what do I mean by left to right world? So
Mhm.
if you look in articles, research articles, or commentary in textbooks, everything goes from left to right. So it's like there are no reciprocal relationships, right? So, um, but but the way real systems work is with reciprocal relationships. So, what is the culture of the organization? Well, I already said I think it's made up at least partially of the people there,
Mhm.
and the founder and the founders and the early successes of the organization lead to the kinds of lead to the ways the organization will operate with those kinds of people who were involved early on, and lo and behold, that's the kind of people who they then try and seek out and hire and who become attracted to the organization and so forth. And so you have this, the reason why I think culture persists in organizations over time is because the organization tends to attract, select, and keep the kinds of people who made it initially successful. So we have
Mm,
all of these, data showing the durability of organization culture, even when new CEOs come in and so forth and so forth. And in fact, some new CEOs who come into organizations get forced out by the people there because they didn't fit the culture that was there.
mm. Yeah, it's so critical to have that alignment. And what's interesting, what you said, because we're focused on talent attraction right now, but it really is more of that retention piece of being able to keep the people around based on that alignment. So that's really interesting. And then the other side of that, the other side of retention, the term quiet quitting speaks to what happens when employees become disengaged. I
Right.
always laugh at these terms as they come out, quiet quitting, just because I always have been talking about engagement and disengagement for many, many years. But it's the hot topic right now, the trending phrase. And so, given your experience with work engagement, what recommendations do you have for leaders and managers looking to engage their employees to kind of combat this quiet quitting phenomena that's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So I have a number of thoughts about that, the quiet quitting issue. First, we've known forever that the better the labor market, the higher the turnover rate. So as the labor market opens up for people, turnover in companies will go up. So that's not the question. The question is, from which companies are there the highest levels of turnover? And there's almost no doubt that it has to do with all of these issues that IO psychologists have been studying forever, like job satisfaction, organizational commitment. So we went from job satisfaction to organizational commitment to work engagement. Now there's all these articles appearing about passion. So we're really getting to the emotional state, right? Of how people see their work and their work organization. My impression is that we have stopped focusing on the work itself as
Hmm.
much as I think we should.
Hmm.
We're focusing more on, interpersonal relationships and supervisory subordinate relationships and getting along with your team members and so forth and so forth. And not that those are unimportant, but somehow or other, I think we've lost emphasis on the work itself that people do. So the old job characteristics, work of Hackman and Oldham and so forth, somehow or other the work itself has fallen into disrepute. I think when companies, for example, go about trying to automate jobs, everybody's trying to automate jobs to save money on labor costs because you can't find people and so forth and so forth. I I, I think that companies that try and do things to get rid of people are making a mistake because they're not asking people, how can we make your work better for you and the company?
Yeah.
So they're I don't understand why companies don't talk to their people about how to improve the work, both for the company and their people. I mean, I've made a lot of money as a consultant where I go and talk to the employees and companies and I ask the company, hey, I'm willing to take your money, but why don't you talk to them? I mean, it's like I I, I recently heard about a project at the Volvo truck company in Scandinavia, and they're trying to develop new manufacturing of an all electric truck.
Mm.
And what they did is instead of going in thinking they knew what had to be done, they went and talked to the employees who were going to be working on these new processes. And they asked the employees, the really difficult question, right? How could we do this thing that we want to do in the best way possible? And lo and behold, they got great input from the people who actually do the work. Same thing happened at Audi in Germany when they tried to redo their plant. So I think people know much more than we give them credit for about the work they do. And I don't think it's good that we haven't been focusing as much on the work people do as we have on these other characteristics.
Yeah, yeah, and the importance of job design and how we can be crafting our jobs. I feel like a lot of times that onus of responsibility gets on the workers themselves, but what can leaders and managers do to help with that job crafting in a way that actually results in that retention that we care about. We do have a question from the audience. I'm going to share that on the screen. This is from, let me see, what is her name? This is from Sierra. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry if I messed that up. But let's get to your question. Do you think moving towards operating more as a system versus embracing our human nature within organizations could be detrimental to us as a people in the future?
Well, I guess I don't follow what the question is. Well, why would it be detrimental to focus on organizations as a system, which would allow for more attention to the breadth of who people are.
Yeah.
I think one of the I'm when I say we need to focus on the job, the task,
Yeah.
I don't mean that's the only focus, right? I'm arguing that I think we've dropped off on a focus on the work, that these other things are important. Yeah, so let me say, when I read the research literature, and I still actually read the research literature, I'm surprised at how how few papers approach the issue of the topic of the paper from multiple vantage points.
Mm.
So, for example, there's this great review of the leadership embeddedness literature in the recent issue of the Journal of Applied Psychology. And I loved reading the article, and I think I learned a lot from reading the article. And now the question is, how does that relate to the tasks that people do? And how does that relate to the pay levels,
Yeah.
or the way, the fairness with which people are treated? And so I'm always trying to ask how things are connected to each other to make up for the totality of the experience that people have.
Yeah. Such a great response. So the short answer is no.
Yeah,
No, it
right.
will not be detrimental if done right, and if really using all of our skills as an IO psychologist to create those clear connections between what the job is, who the person is, and
Yeah,
how
I
we have
see the
to.
question now. It says, "Do you think moving towards operating more as a system versus embracing? Why is that a versus? Why can't we move toward operating more as a system by embracing our human nature?
I love that.
It's not
I
a
love that.
versus. It's not a
Yeah,
versus thing.
it needs
These
to be
things are
embedded.
operating together."
It needs to be embedded. I think we have time for just one or two more questions. I wanted to put this up from Dr. King here, who loved your 50 years of learnings paper, and he was struck by the focus on the basics that you emphasize in that paper. It feels difficult to get leaders to adopt these kind of systems in his experience. Why do you think many leaders are resistant to establishing systems within these basic ideas? So, why are leaders resistant to this systems level approach?
Well, they haven't been trained to do it. They
Yeah.
haven't been trained to think about it as systems. They they have I'm avoiding getting carried away with my capitalism argument, right? They they have an implicit theory that the focus of an organization is on profits, and the key to profits is by ensuring that money is spent only on what's important. And what's
Mm,
important? Production. And so you see how people get pushed down that very narrow line of thinking without taking into account the fact that if they are an organization, they are a human organization, and therefore the human issues must be taken into account and attended to if you want to get to that profit line. And and I have one great recent example of that. So many companies, especially in the service world, use workforce scheduling as a way to keep costs down by
mm,
only having staff at work when there's high levels of customers to be served. But the people who are working on those work schedules hate them because they
mm,
can't plan ahead.
yeah.
Their days are disrupted and everything like that. So this paper shows that in units that have the highest use of workforce schedule planning have the lowest profits and the highest employee turnover. So this, it looks like by cutting back work schedules to meet demand, you're going to save money, and it actually costs you money because it doesn't take into account the human issue. So it's thinking in these systems like modes that I don't know how to get people to do it, but I think you got to sit them down and present them with real kinds of problems and make sure that they solve the problem using a systems approach.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then we have another question from Peggy, who agrees that the focus on work has dropped. And does the work itself, provide a sense of mastery, achievement, autonomy, belongingness? You know, the McGregor model. And are people able to learn and grow in the work they do? You know, with this focus that we've been talking about today.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. Hi, Peggy. So I mean, it's like, yeah, of course, but you can't just focus on the work,
Yeah.
right? I mean, even in Kahn's great early work on engagement, while it was focused on work, it wasn't only focused on work. It was focused on the larger environment in which that work exists. So the work engagement literature, unfortunately, has the word work in it, when really it's the engagement in all facets of the organization and organizational life that counts towards work engagement, as of course the Gallup measure of work engagement shows. It's got 12 facets, none of which say engagement, but address all of the different kinds of issues that people encounter at work in which they might be, or to which they might be connected. It's always a system of of issues that yield the consequence of interest.
I think going even back to a previous question of why, you know, leaders and managers don't do this, people just want simple solutions. And I feel like that's one of our biggest value adds as IO psychologists, of helping organizational leaders understand the systems level, understand the nuance, understand that reciprocal relationship that you were talking about earlier. We are just about out of time, Ben. Is there anything, any final words of wisdom or good research that people should know about when it comes to the science of, you know, attraction and getting these employees in the door in a very applicant-driven market?
People are attracted to and love being with organizations and companies that are successful.
Mm,
And the important thing for organizations to understand is that their success and the success of employees who work in the organizations are intimately related. These are not separate issues. They are intimately related issues. And the companies that get that right, that understand that people want to be successful and they want their companies to be successful, and the more those two can simultaneously occur, the more likely it is that both will occur. And and the human issue is not separate from the success of the organization. It doesn't detract from the success of the organization. Just like the success of the organization is not independent of the people there. But both people, both sets of people like success. And it needs to be encouraged as a simultaneous, as a co-occurrence, rather than something that operates independently.
absolutely, absolutely. And this myth that having a human-centric approach is in opposition to a profits-driven approach. I feel like that's a myth that it's our responsibility as IO psychologists to help organizational leaders break. And I can't imagine a better plug for IO psychology in general and the value that we bring to organizations. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And Ben, on behalf of SIOP and all of our listeners, thank you so much for this engaging and enlightening conversation and taking the time to speak with us today.
That time certainly flew, and I really appreciate this, Victoria. Thank you so much.
Of course, it's my absolute pleasure. Listeners out there, please join us for our next conversation in January. We're actually moving to a monthly cadence starting in January. You are our final guest here in 2022, Ben, and so thank you for being our nice capstone. We really appreciate you taking the time. We look forward to seeing all you listeners again soon, and until next time, take care.